1 in 5 American adults have had a family member killed by a gun. That's according to a survey by the Kaiser Family Foundation. Among people of color, gun violence plays an even bigger role in their lives, with 1 in 3 black adults saying they have personally witnessed a shooting. To understand how communities are affected by gun violence, I talked to activist and founder of the TraRon Center, Ryane Nickens.
Nickens grew up in Ward 8, a neighborhood in southeastern Washington, D.C. In recent decades, this area has been plagued by drug and gang violence.
Ryane, maybe the best way to start is just kind of give us an idea of what it was like for you growing up in Ward 8. How would you describe it?
It's a mixed bag. So I would say that it was hell and heaven all at the same time. While life happens, and it happened early and it happened often for me, there was still a sense of community. I still had this family around me that loved me, community leaders and neighbors who supported me, teachers. So there was still this love around me, but there was still the pain of losing my sister, my brother, the pain of my mom being shot, of growing up ducking and dodging bullets. That trauma was still there. So it was this heaven and this hell, and it seemed at times to be out of balance. Sometimes it felt like heaven, sometimes it was strictly hell.
Nickens earned her Bachelor of Arts in Communication from North Carolina Central University and a Master's of Divinity from Howard University. Currently, she serves on the board of directors for the Wesley Foundation at Howard University.
On 9/11, I was at the Pentagon, and one of the memories I have, of course, is watching the jet go into the Pentagon, but the other is the soundtrack of that day, which was just sirens. Just you heard sirens and sirens and sirens as all these ambulances came and fire trucks and stuff. But when I look back on that day, that's the soundtrack. It's just sirens. And I imagine you must have a soundtrack from your youth too. What would it be?
Laughing through tears. Trying to find the good in all the bad. Trying to figure out what comes next. So it's this sorrowful cry, but yet it has some joy. I have a really good therapist, thank God. And we have been working through, as a woman of faith, we've been working through yesteryear. Some things I've overcome and I've worked through, and other things I have not. And there are a number of traumas that happened that I put in the back of my mind to keep going. Obviously, I couldn't ignore the murders of my siblings or the shooting of my mother, but there were the, family members, there were the neighbors and the friends. There were the times where, I had to duck behind a car because of a drive-by or even a walk-by, somebody literally walking and trying to shoot someone else. And so I put all those things in the back of my mind.
Isn't that like one of the things that people struggle with is there a reason to live? I mean, where's the hope? And I imagine at some point in your life, given this kind of environment, you wrestled with that question.
I not only wrestled with it, 22 days after my sister was killed, I tried to commit suicide as a 15-year-old, first time on Christmas Day. I thought what had happened to my family, because our next door neighbor essentially shot and killed my sister who was pregnant, shot my mother, my brother, and another sister. And so I thought life was over. Here is my sister Tracy, who was my protector, my mom, who has now to deal with a new reality, and who could have lost her life. And in those days leading up to the first suicide attempt, I lived as if I lost everything that night. That on December the 3rd, 1993, everything was taken away. And so on Christmas Day, I took some pills, drank a bottle of NyQuil, took 2 bottles full of pills that I found in our cabinet in the bathroom, and drank some NyQuil, and literally prepared myself for my death. Wrote the suicide note, just said that this was too much for me. It was just literally too much, and that I thought at that point, nothing good ever was gonna happen again. That for me, what happened on that night was simply too much for me to move from. And not one, my parents didn't know that, I did it, because I woke up. I spent mornings and early afternoons with my mom and evenings with my dad on holidays. And so when my sister woke me up, because my dad was there to pick us up for dinner at my grandmother's, I was disgusted that I was still alive. Like, God, if nothing comes after this, why are you keeping me here? If this is my lot in life, let me end it. And I lived in this darkness for a while until my parents sent me to therapy. I lived in that dark reality of my hope being so buried under the traumas of what I had experienced.
Since 2019, gun violence has become the leading cause of death among Americans under the age of 18, surpassing car accidents. Among African American children, the rate of gun deaths per 100,000 children is 11.8. That is more than 5 times higher than other racial and ethnic groups.
I spoke to a gentleman in California years ago who was talking about the trauma that's seen by young people like yourself. And he said, in many respects, these are people that don't really even have the capacity to hope, because it's just been stripped from them. Did you feel that way at that time? And how do you kind of crawl your back or scrape your way back to a place where there is hope?
I did, and finding my way back was therapy. Having a culturally appropriate therapist who, introduced me to writing, journaling through my pain. And then I figured that, I would honor, my sister was killed in 93, my brother in 96, that I wanted to honor their lives. And so by honoring their lives, that meant that I would become the best version of me possible, that I would pursue dreams and goals that they no longer could. And so that's, my hope was restored in wanting to make their lives mean something in this world. And that meant, going to college, starting a career. I often tell people I wanted to be the Oprah Winfrey of sports reporting, but God had other things for me to do. But yeah, it's finding that hope again and finding something to live for. And I found that in wanting to honor the lives of my sister and my brother.
Can you describe what it's like to live in your world where it doesn't seem like there's as much focus on it as there is on this other one, which gets more headlines?
Yeah, we cannot talk about, gun violence without talking about systemic racism and this issue. And I know people always like to say, why do you all always play the race card? because it's the hand we've been dealt, and that's what is in it. When we look at the last 4 decades, those being killed by guns were Black and brown people in underserved communities. And so it didn't mean anything, but then Sandy Hook happened. And you see the faces of these beautiful little white babies who went to school, simply was enjoying kindergarten and all of these in elementary school. And suddenly that could have been your daughter. Suddenly for some people, it awakens because they now see themselves in the victim. They now see how their child's life could have been robbed. That this isn't just isolated to ghettos and to hoods and to big cities. This is a problem. This is a huge problem. It was a quiet working class family community. And then the crack cocaine epidemic hit.
Nickens' story was featured in the documentary Ricochet, An American Trauma, produced by PBS. The film shows how trauma can be turned into activism.
You said in a documentary I watched, you're on an island, and when there's no hope, trauma is what sits there.
Yeah.
And obviously people watching this, we've got viewers around the world and experiencing whatever trauma they're experiencing. What advice would you give them in terms of on the healing journey? How do you get there?
Don't run from it. Sometimes you have to, trauma is a beast. It is that thing where you want to get through as quickly as possible, but it's a process. And that thing that happened to you will always be with you, but it's the response to it. Create healthy responses. That's what helped me, because early on I self-medicated my pain with alcohol as a teen, did some other things, but it wasn't until I began to do some more healthier things, to find those healthy things like journaling, having an accountability partner that I could talk to when the times got rough, and facing what happened to me. And that is the hardest thing to do, is to face what happened to you, to admit that it happened, to admit your feelings to it. There is no one way to respond to trauma, but if you can't face it, things that aren't faced you can't deal with, and you will be stuck on that island of grief, and finding all the ways to run from it and to hide in it.
In 1999, 2 12th grade students from Columbine High School in Colorado shot and killed 12 students and 1 teacher. Since Columbine, there have been 380 school shootings in the U.S., affecting more than 352,000 students.
I think often about, these poor parents, send their kids off on a school bus, go to school, they never see them again. And it's heartbreaking. But then I think of your story. I mean, it's an uncle, it's a sister, it's a brother. That's not just one family member going off to school and never coming back again. I mean, it's so many people don't have any concept of what that's like as a young girl, choosing suicide because it's just what you've witnessed, what you've gone through. What would you like them to know?
I sometimes it is hard because the loss is loss. The mother who lost her daughter, to a mass shooting, a family that lost a loved one to a mass shooting, that pain is still real. A sibling who lost a sibling to a mass shooting, I could identify with that because I love my siblings. I thought we had more time. And then one day, in one instance, someone with a gun decided to end their lives. The stories are about the same. There's a gun, There's a person who decides they want to be judge, jury, and executioner over your loved one's life. And you now have the phone call or the knock at the door that tells you that. I can empathize with them. I see their pain. And some of that, some folks have correlated it to say, it's a once in a lifetime experience for that family, but for you, it is this ongoing threat of any moment and any time you can get that call. I want people to understand pain is pain. And if we all are together in this fight and we understand that there are different cases of gun violence, there's mass shootings, there are domestic intimate partner shootings, there are random shootings, there's communal violence, like suicides, and then there are suicides. They're different things, but the pain is the same.
Where do you see the tipping point? I mean, when do we see change?
Sadly, I don't know. I used to think if it happened to white folks that we could start to see movement. And in some respects, we have seen some movement, but I think if it happened to a politician's child or something, maybe, I think we are, as Americans, are so in love with our guns, so possessive of our freedoms and our right, and that right to bear arms is one thing that folks love. Some folks love. Just to clarify, I don't own a gun. I don't want to own a gun. I've never felt the need to own a gun. But that's such a hard question, because it's like, what will it take? And with every mass shooting and with the continued violence that we see, like the case in Florida where two fathers it's a traffic situation and they have their daughters in the car with them and they're shooting at each other. A young boy who was shot in Missouri just from knocking on the wrong door. I don't know exactly what it will take. I pray that we get there, but I don't know, because in our spaces, we say, well, maybe this, when a child is killed, maybe folks will get it. Maybe another school shooting, maybe this time they'll get it, and this time we'll move. And then we go about our lives and we keep going into the next thing.
Nickens founded the TraRon Center, a refuge for gun violence victims. The nonprofit offers counseling programs, therapeutic arts, and workshops to raise community consciousness about the impact of gun violence.
Tell us about the center. I mean, can you just kind of describe, coming up with the idea, formulating the idea, and then actually the execution?
So I was just finishing up my master's degree at Howard University, and the thought came, there was always going to be a TraRon Center, and it's the first three letters of my brother and my sister's name, Tracy and Ronnie, to honor their memory. And it wasn't until that meeting that I decided, with God's help, to move in the direction of healing, to move into a space to provide. And I think in some aspects, I was trying to heal my mother and heal my father, and heal the child in me that was hurt, and creating the space, because we work with children 4 to 14, and we have group sessions for adults. I think it was that led to it, and it was talking to therapists, reading research on trauma as it relates to gun violence, like what is the best therapy for children? How can we do something that's culturally appropriate? How do we do this? And I speak in we because I just prayed God bring the funders, the people, the staff, and those who would believe in the mission. And that happened. I mean, everything just kind of just went. Like, I shared the dream and the vision, and people grabbed a hold of it, and it was just off from there. Like, doors just opened for us.
And the difference you're making, I mean, you see it every day, don't you? I mean, you know that it's channeling young people in a different direction they might not have gone.
Yeah, I mean, I see it, but I also struggle. We're a small nonprofit, and we can, with a small staff, you can help but so many. You don't want to overcrowd a space and then you miss something with a child or with a family. But as I see the number of young people engaging in criminal activity in our city, I see the number of young people being murdered in our city, and I see the continuum of people being murdered. There is lamenting there. There is this wanting to do more, feeling like I need to do more, staying up late at night thinking through how do we grow and how do we reach more children? How do we reach more families to just engage them in healing, to engage them in other things outside of their community, by teaching, by being consistent in their lives, by loving them, by showing them a different way from what they see sometimes in their homes and in their communities. We have seen our kids thrive. And, you know, having a conversation with them is cool, because yelling gets you so far. But if you have a calm, cool, collected conversation with them, then you get further and you model it for them. And so when they're engaging with people who want to yell, like, look, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to talk.
Well, you said it. Having a conversation is cool, especially if it's with you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate this. It's been a great time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.